Good afternoon, everyone. I am Simran, your PMRF teaching assistant from IIT Bombay. So, this is a week 8 for this course, Medicinal Chemistry, which is a NPTEL platform course, and the course instructors are Professor Harinath Chakrapani from IISER Pune. So, as we have already discussed 7 lectures of this series, so this is the tutorial 8. I hope you all have already gone through the 7 videos which I have already uploaded. So this is a problem solving session which will be held every Saturday from 5 to 7, and the platform is Google Meet. So here this is the Google Meet platform in which we are meeting every Saturday. So in case of any network disruption, please wait for me to join and do not leave the class. And please ask your queries in the chat box or raise your hand during the lecture so that the lecture is not getting disturbed. So these slides will be shared with you guys soon. And to see the recordings of the session which we have already taken, so that will be available on my YouTube channel, that is Simran NPTEL TA. So you can go through that NPTEL YouTube channel, sorry, and there you will find all the recordings of the session we have taken so far. And please make sure to attend every tutorial to understand the course better. So if you want to understand this medicinal chemistry course better, please make sure that you are attending every tutorial. If you are not able to attend any of the tutorial, before coming to the next tutorial, you can go through the YouTube channel on which I have recorded and I have uploaded all the session recording, and there you can find whichever session you have missed. So week wise I have distributed that. So depending on which week you have missed the class, you can go through that video and then come to this running tutorial, so that you will understand the course better, you will understand what I'm going to teach in the further classes. So that will make the thing smooth. So these are the standing instructions for this course. So now coming to week 8 content. So this is the content for week 8, that is optimizing drug target interaction part 1, part 2, part 3 and part 4. So today's tutorial will be dedicated on to this content, that is the optimizing drug target interaction. So how the drug is administered, how it is going to affect your body, these kind of things we are talking about today. So first of all, we will be discussing some of the concepts here. So that is some kind of drugs known as Me Too drugs. So what are these Me Too drugs? Me Too drugs are medications that are similar to an existing drug, often with minor modification and used to treat the same condition, but may have slight difference in side effects or activity. They may offer improvements in the efficacy, a different adverse effect profile, or effectiveness in patient resistant to the prototype. Me Too drugs can have therapeutic advantage, including improved target specificity, reduced risk of off-target adverse reactions, and increased chance of benefit in some patients. So these Me Too drugs are actually the drugs which actually mimic the uh, basically these are the mimicking agents which already have the drug which is already marketed, that is actually sorry. So here these Me Too drugs are the drugs which have a minor modification from the drug which is already available in the market to treat some kind of conditions, but it has some modification from that, and it is also acting as a existing. It is also acting as a drug molecule for targeting that disease, but it could show different activity or different side effects than what the existing drug used to show, right? So it may improve the efficacy, or adverse effect profile will get different, and also the effectiveness of that particular drug in patient which was actually resisting the previous drug. So sometimes what happens that patients will resist. There is a resistance mechanism in our body which actually resists the effect of drugs which we used to take, right? So if you are taking a drug many a times, so what happens that your body is adapting towards it, and it actually develops a resistant mechanism towards that particular drug you have taken, and that is why now your patient is actually resistant to that particular drug. So now you need another drug, another medication to treat the problem in the patient, right? So for that, these Me Too drugs are handy. So these kind of drugs are showing similar kind of activity, but now uh, these are having minor modifications. So that is how they actually improve the effectiveness in the patient, which are actually resisting the previous drug prototype. So Me Too drugs can have therapeutic advantages, including improved target specificities. Basically, these drugs have more specific towards their target molecule, so where they have to uh, where they have to actually show the activity. So that target, that active site, they are very specific for that, and reduce risk of off-target adverse reactions. So the risk may be getting reduced in these drugs. So they are also reducing the risk and increased chance of benefit in some patients. So now some patients used to actually get treated well when you are using this Me Too type of drug rather than the existing drug. Sometimes the patient is actually benefited more by these drugs. So this is known as Me Too drugs, right? I hope it is clear. Now there is another term, that is orphan drugs. So what do you mean by now orphan drugs? So these orphan drugs are pharmaceutical agents developed to treat rare diseases or conditions that affect a small number of people and are often not commercially viable without government assistance. So these drugs are considered often because the small patient population makes it difficult for pharmaceutical companies to recoup the cost of research, development, and marketing. Just a second. So these orphan drugs basically are the pharmaceutical agents. Basically, these are the things which are used to treat some rare kind of conditions that is actually present in small number of people. Like the population which is getting affected by that disease is very less in number, and that is why it is not commercially available. Like you are buying a paracetamol, it is widely available and is actually commercially available, but if you are talking about these orphan drugs, these are hard to find. These basically are not given without the recommendation of a doctor or government assistance. So that is actually not possible to commercialize that thing. So these drugs are considered often because small patient population make it difficult for the pharmaceutical company to recoup the cost of research, development, and marketing. So uh, the amount of people is getting affected by these kind of conditions, and the amount of people actually want that drug is so less that pharmaceutical companies are not actually making that particular thing. We are not developing method that can reduce the cost of that drug molecule. They are not doing the research, they are not doing the development and the marketing for that. So that becomes very difficult for the pharmaceutical company to get hands on. So that is why they are known as orphan drugs. These are actually present in very less amount of people. Rare diseases are there uh, for which these drugs are used, and it is not commercially available, right? So these drugs are considered often because small patient population makes it difficult for pharmaceutical companies to reduce the cost of that drug molecule. Okay, so these are known as orphan drugs. So I hope it is clear to all of you what are these terms of me too drugs and orphan drugs. If someone has doubt, please ask me. So if it is clear, then I'm moving forward. So the first question is, the major disadvantage of oral drug administration is rapid onset of action, first pass metabolism, direct systemic absorption, immediate bioavailability. So we have already discussed about this oral drug administration, how you can, what are the pathways of taking drugs, right? So we have discussed it in the previous tutorial, the routes of administration of drugs, and how uh, some of the administration routes is bypassing the first pass metabolism, and how they are going to be going to get affected in your body. So this is what we have discussed in previous lecture. So based on that, I have added some of the questions so that you can answer it rapidly. You understand something over it. Okay. So the question is the major disadvantage of taking a oral drug. Is it a rapid onset of action? Is it first pass metabolism? Is it direct systemic absorption or immediate bioactivity? Availability, sorry. So, what do you think will be the right answer based on what we have discussed previously? So, the right answer is first pass metabolism. See, when you are taking a oral drug, it is the main disadvantage is that it is not passing the first pass metabolism. So, I have talked about this bioavailability that if you are taking an intravenous injection, that means 100% bioavailability of that molecule is there because now the 100% of the thing is acting on your target site, right? But if you are taking a drug orally, then it is getting metabolized when it is passing through your organs, it is passing through your body and going to the target site. Before reaching to the target site, it is actually losing some of its uh, concentration. Why? Because it is getting metabolized, it is getting absorbed by your body, right? So that is why now the bioavailability is not 100%, it is reducing. So oral drug is not going to give you a rapid onset of action because it takes time to get absorbed, metabolized, and actually reach to the particular target. And in between, it is actually getting metabolized and absorbed by the body. So oral drugs actually doesn't show rapid onset of action. Then first pass metabolism, this is the right answer. Direct systemic absorption, it is not happening with oral drug administration at all. It is not getting directly into your systemic absorption. First of all, it is going through the different parts of your body. Immediate bioavailability, that is also not there because the bioavailability is getting reduced when you're taking a oral drug. So drugs taken orally pass through the gastrointestinal tract and then the liver via the portal vein before reaching systemic circulation. In the liver, metabolic enzymes may metabolize a significant portion of the drug, reducing its bioavailability. This is known as first pass metabolism. Okay, so if you are taking a drug, so first of all it is passing through your gastrointestinal tract and then it's going into your liver, then it is reaching to systemic circulation. And in liver, as we have already discussed, that the first pass metabolism is taking place in the liver, and in liver you have that metabolic enzymes which actually metabolizing your significant portion of that drug which you have taken, and that is why it is not 100% available for the target site, which is known as first pass metabolism. Okay, I hope it is clear to all of you why the option B is the correct answer. Going forward, so which of the following is not a parenteral route of drug administration? Intravenous injection, intramuscular injection, subcutaneous, or oral? So in previous class, we have talked about something called as drugs route of administration, and in that we have talked about enteral, parenteral, and that inhalation kind of things, right? So in that particular thing, we have discussed that enteral, how you can take it. There is a oral subcutaneous thing which you have taken, sorry, sublingual. That is oral, sublingual, and enema. So these three coming into the enteral route of drug administration. But when you are talking about that parenteral route of drug administration, then you are talking about the injections and inhalation, right? So that thing, uh, what do you think will be the right answer based on that which we have discussed? So, what do you think is the correct answer? This is not a parenteral route of drug and administration. So, the right answer is D, oral. See, parenteral administration refers to route that actually bypass the gastrointestinal tract, such as IV, IM, subcutaneous injections. So these things are passing the first pass metabolism. Okay, when you are talking about parenteral route, but when you're talking about enteral route, it is not bypassing the first pass metabolism. So oral drug administration is coming into the enteral route rather than the parenteral route. So that is why oral administration involves the GI tract and is therefore not parenteral. So parenteral administration actually focus on the bypassing of gastrointestinal tract, and in oral administration you are not bypassing that mechanism, and that's why it is not coming into that domain. Okay, so I hope it is clear to all of you. So next question is: controlled drug delivery systems are designed to increase drug toxicity, maintain constant drug concentration in plasma, decrease drug absorption, increase metabolism. So, what do you mean by controlled drug delivery system? Why is it designed? So, the right answer is maintain constant drug concentration in plasma. So, what happened here? See, controlled drug delivery system release drugs at a predetermined rate. Means, as the name suggests, controlled drug delivery. So, that means it is releasing drug molecule at a predetermined rate, maintaining the therapeutic drug levels for longer periods and reducing dosing frequency. So, controlled drug delivery systems are particularly designed so that your drug concentration will remain maintained in the bloodstream, maintaining the therapeutic drug levels for longer periods and reducing dosing frequency. So, your dosage will not get reduced frequently. So, this is why the controlled drug delivery systems are designed. So, I hope it is clear. Next question is: what is a lead compound in drug discovery? A lead compound in drug discovery is defined as a compound with no biological activity, a compound that shows promising biological activity and can be optimized, a compound used only in clinical trials, or a compound with high toxicity. So, what do you think is a lead compound? So the correct answer is option number B, a compound that shows promising biological activity and can be optimized. See, a lead compound cannot be a compound which doesn't have any biological activity. If it is not showing any biological activity, why would we worry about it, right? So a lead compound in drug discovery is actually a compound that has some biological activity in which we can further optimize. Further optimize means we further can adjust the activity, we further can increase the activity of that particular drug. A compound used only in clinical trial, that is also not correct. And a compound with high toxicity. If a compound is of high toxicity, then what it is doing in drug discovery, right? So this is the wrong answer. So answer number B is the correct one. A compound that shows promising biological activity and can be optimized. So what do you mean by a lead compound? A lead compound is a molecule that shows desired biological activity against a biological target and serves as a starting point for optimization through medicinal chemistry. So you are getting a compound. See, understand like that. If you have something like, if you are searching about a biological target, right? If you're searching for a compound which shows biological activity which works, right? And it should be active to a particular target, right? So if you are searching along like that, so if you found a compound which is actually showing some kind of activity, some kind of desired activity, if it is 10% active to that particular target, 10% active, then that compound will, you will call it as a lead compound because it is a starting point. It is a starting point from where you are now increasing the efficacy of that particular compound, increasing the biological activity for that particular target. So now, if you are finding any compound which is somehow showing certain level of biological activity which was desired, obviously, then you will call it as a lead compound, and then you will start your medicinal chemistry thing from that compound. So now you are optimizing over it. That is a starting point from your drug discovery. Okay, so this is what known as lead compound. So I hope it is clear to all of you what is a lead compound. Coming to the next question. Lead compound optimization aims to increase toxicity of the compound, improve potency, selectivity, pharmacokinetic property, reduce biological activity, eliminate drug metabolism. So if you are right now we know what is a lead compound, right? So if you are developing a lead compound, so what will be the optimization is aiming? So if you are optimizing that compound, what would you aim to? Is it increasing the toxicity of the compound? I think from the knowledge which you have got till now, the option A is the wrong one because to increase the toxicity, it is stand away wrong because here you are you want to decrease the toxicity of the remaining drug also. So why you are focusing on decreasing the toxicity, right? So yes, option A is the wrong answer. Now going to the option B, improve potency, selectivity, and pharmacokinetic properties. See, the lead optimization is actually focusing on what? Improving the potency of the drug molecule, selectivity for the target site, and pharmacokinetic property. That means that ADME system which we have studied earlier, adsorption and that metabolism and dissolution and excretion. So that we have already looked at in the previous lecture as well. So these things are actually important to optimize to increase. Okay, coming to the option C, reduce biological activity. Obviously, it is the wrong answer. Why? Because the biological activity you want to the lead compound to show high biological activity, right? You don't want that the biological activity which actually it is showing get reduced, right? You don't want that. So option D, if you're talking about eliminate drug metabolism, that is also not correct because eliminating the drug, that actually you can say that here the elimination of the drug metabolism is somewhat it is showing that the drug molecule is not getting metabolized. See, on some extent, you want that the drug molecule is less likely to be metabolized before acting to the target site, right? So, if you are taking some molecule and it is getting metabolized with time before reaching the target molecule, then it is not, what do you say that? It is not preferential, it is not desired, okay? But eliminating the drug metabolism, it is also not desired. Why? Because you have to metabolize the excess amount of drug which is present in your body, and that is how you have excreted it from the body, right? This is a pathway of excretion as well. So excess of drug should be excreted from your body, that also not remain in your body. There should be a mechanism to do that, right? That is why it is not the focus of lead optimization to eliminate the drug metabolism completely. Somehow you want that your compound doesn't get metabolized before acting to the active site, but you don't want to eliminate the drug metabolism completely. Okay, there is a major difference between these two. So you have to understand that concept, that yes, you want that drug metabolism should happen at the lower rate, but yes, you doesn't want to eliminate it completely. Okay. So based on this thing which we have discussed, now what do you think will be the right answer? So yes, option B will be the right answer. So lead optimization aims to improve potency, selectivity, and pharmacokinetic properties. Okay. So during lead optimization, chemists modify the lead compound to improve activity, selectivity, absorption, distribution, metabolism, and toxicity. That is what ADME processes, right? Absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion. So I hope it is clear to all of you. Going to the next question. Molecular docking study help to predict binding orientation of a drug in target protein, determine drug color, measure drug melting point, determine drug stability in air. So they're asking, what do you mean by molecular docking? This study is helping in what way? Okay, so molecular docking, the right answer is predict binding orientation of a drug in a target protein. So molecular docking computationally predicts how a small molecule fits into the active site of protein, helping understands binding interaction and affinity. So molecular docking, as the name suggests, is predict the binding orientation of a drug in a target protein. So this is a it is a thing in which you can computationally predict whether your molecule your drug molecule will fit into that particular active site of the protein or not, right? So how a small molecule is getting fit into your active site of the protein, that is predicted by molecular docking. So that study helped in predicting the binding or interaction and affinity. Okay, so that is known as molecular docking. I hope it is clear. Now coming to the next question. What is the term used for drugs such as silazarpril, lisinopril, enalapril, for all of which were developed as antihypertensive following the discovery of captopril? So, Me Too drug, orphan drug, analogs, or active principles. Okay. So, we have just now talked about Me Too drugs and orphan drugs. So, they are asking which terms is used for the drugs like these three, which all are antihypertensive drugs and are discovered by and discovered after the discovery of captopril. So captopril is also an antihypertensive, but after the discovery of this captopril, these three drugs are getting discovered. These four are showing the antihypertensive activity. So the activity was same for these four, but they are asking which term are used for these three drugs, which are actually same, showing the similar biological activity, but are discovered after the captopril. So is it me too drugs? Is it orphan drugs? Is it analogs? Or is it active? So what do you think will be the right answer for this? Anyone? Any answers? If you have understood the concept of Me Too drugs and orphan drugs well, then you are able to answer it. Okay, so right answer is Me Too drugs. Why Me Too drugs? So we will one by one looked at Me Too drugs, orphan drugs, and analog and active principles. So one by one we will be looking what are these four things. So two things we have already discussed, but now analogs and active principle we don't know about it, right? So we haven't discussed. So here we will discussing about that also. So first of all, going to Me Too drugs. As we have discussed, these are the chemically similar to an already existing drug, but may have minor modification. As you can see in the structure of these four, structurally, basically these are the molecules having this pyrrolidine kind of structure, right? Pyrrolidine is there, and then it is building upon that. So these four structures are having that thing in between them, but they are structurally modifying with each other, right? So the structure is not exactly similar, just the skeleton from that pyrrolidine ring is similar. So they are chemically similar to an already existing drug but may have minor modification. Me Too drugs are the drugs developed to compete with established drugs in the market, right? These often have similar efficacy or mechanism of action, but may differ slightly in pharmacokinetic or side effects. So it may have similar efficiency or mechanism of action from the drug which is already existing in the market, but it could be differ from that particular drug in terms of pharmacokinetics or side effects of that drug. Okay. So for example, they have given this ibuprofen and naproxen. So both are the NSAIDs with similar actions. So these are non-steroidal drugs, but having similar action. Okay. So these two drugs are chemically similar, but they are different in pharmacokinetics and side effects. So these kind of drugs are known as Me Too drugs that are similar to what is available in the market, but with minor modifications. The modification is reflected in the difference in pharmacokinetics and side effects, but often sometimes what happens is similar. They show the similar efficiency and the mechanism of action. Okay, they shows the action in a similar way. So these drugs are known as Me Too drugs. So I hope it is clear what is Me Too drugs by now. So second is the orphan drugs. Also, we have discussed this. So, what are these orphan drugs? So these are the drugs that are developed for rare diseases. That is orphan diseases. Also, we can call it that affect a small number of people. So these drugs are developed for the rare conditions which happening in small amount of people. They often lack commercial viability because the patient population is too small to recover development cost. Government may provide incentives to encourage their development. So these drugs are not commercialized that much. This is not it lacks commercial viability because patient population which actually requires that particular drug is very low, right? Very less amount of people are there having these kind of problems with them, and they need these kind of drugs to treat them. That is why they are often lack commercial viability. And government actually pass some kind of incentives, tax break, grants to encourage their development. So these are known as orphan drugs. For example, ivacaftor. Ivacaftor is a drug which is used for cystic fibrosis, and this curlizumab for paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria. So these kind of diseases, which is actually rare, these drugs are available for curing that diseases, and it is not commercially viable, and that is why they are known as orphan drugs. So these drugs are very less in number and is actually required by a small amount of people. Okay, so I hope this orphan drugs is clear to all of you. What are those? Now these two drugs which we have already discussed. Now coming to the third one, that is the analogs. So now what are these analogs? So these analogs are the compounds that are structurally similar to another drug or molecule but may have differences in function or potency. Okay. So these compounds are structurally similar to what the existing drug is, but they are different in the function and potency. So basically the function of that particular two drugs would be different. They often designed to enhance efficacy, reduce side effects, or improve bioavailability. So these analogs, as the name suggests, they are similar to what the existing drug is, but they differ in the function or potency, and also they are designed by because to enhance the efficacy of the drug, reduce the side effects which the previous drug, existing drugs was giving, and improve the bioavailability. So example is insulin analogs like insulin Lispro versus Nebula insulin. So this insulin Lispro is rapidly acting. So insulin has analogs like regular insulin which we have, and that this insulin Lispro. This insulin Lispro shows a rapid activity, enhanced efficacy, enhanced potency than the regular insulin. So that is how it is an analog to regular insulin. I hope it is clear what is this analogs. Going to this fourth compound, that is active principles. So, as the name suggests, these active principles are the main bioactive component in a drug or natural product that is responsible for its pharmacological effect. These are found in both synthetic drugs and plant-based medicine. So, active principles are the main bioactive component in a drug or natural product that is responsible for its pharmacological effect. So, these are the compounds which are present in a drug, which is primarily responsible for the pharmacological effect that drug is producing. Okay. So, these are found in synthetic drugs and plant-based medicines. For example, morphine, active principle of opium, caffeine, active principle of coffee. So these active principles are the active compounds, main bioactive compounds that are giving the pharmacological effect, which is actually responsible for the pharmacological effect that drug is showing. So if a drug is there, so the main bioactive component, the bioactivity which is there of that drug, the component which is responsible for that bioactivity is known as active principle. So as you see that this opium is basically having a active principle, that is morphine, and similarly coffee has caffeine. So these are known as active principles. So I hope it is clear to all of you what are these four things. Now coming back to the question, so what do you think will be these four are related to? Is it me too drugs, orphan drugs, analogs, or active principles? So by this time I think you will know that these are the me too drugs. Okay. So the term used for drugs such as Cilazapril, lisinopril, enalapril is ACA inhibitors. These are angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors. So these drugs work by inhibiting the angiotensin converting enzyme, which is responsible for the conversion of angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2, a potent vasoconstrictor. So by blocking ACE, these drugs reduce blood pressure and are commonly used as antihypertensives. So they were developed following the discovery of captopril, the first ACA inhibitor. So these things are also acting as an antihypertensive drug, reducing the blood pressure, and they are developed by the after the discovery of captopril. So why do their names end in pril? So the suffix "pril" is a common naming convention used for ACA inhibitor to indicate their pharmacological class. So this helps in easy identification and classification of the drugs within this group. So the drug molecule which are ACA inhibitors comes into this category will be ending their name as pril, so that someone can easily identify that these are the drug which is belonging to that class of drug molecules, right? So that is why some of the medicines are which are showing similar kind of activity, having similar last name. Names end with similar suffix. So I hope it is clear to all of you what are these four things: E2 drugs, orphan drugs, active principles, and this we have discussed this analogs. Okay. So if anyone has any doubt, please ask me. Okay, now going to next question. So basically, first of all, going after the question, so we need to understand what are these hypertensive drugs first. So these hypertensive drugs or antihypertensives are medications that are used to treat high blood pressure, and they include classes like ACE inhibitors, ARBs, calcium channel blockers, diuretics, and beta blockers. So one by one, we will be going through what are these five things. So first thing is ACE inhibitor. We have discussed that this is the angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitor. These medications help relax blood vessels by preventing the production of angiotensin second, a hormone that narrows blood vessels. So these help in relaxing the blood vessels and doesn't allow the production of angiotensin second, which is responsible for narrowing the blood vessels. So, for example, this includes like Prenivil, Gestrel, this Benzazipril, Captopril, Enalapril, Ramipril. So these kind of drugs are responsible for relaxing the blood vessels, and it actually prevents the production of angiotensin 2. So they are often used to treat a heart failure or a heart attack. So these kind of drugs are used when you are having a heart attack or to treat a heart failure. This is ACE inhibitors. Okay. So now what are ARBs? So this is angiotensin 2 receptor blockers. So this ARBs also work by relaxing the blood vessels, but instead of blocking the production of angiotensin 2, they block its effects on blood vessels. So first of all, this ACA inhibitor in first case is working by preventing the production of angiotensin 2. So this angiotensin 2, why, what is it doing? So it is narrowing the blood vessels, and that is why they are getting narrowed, and it is not preferred when you are talking about the this angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitor. So these medications help relaxing the blood pressure. So when you are talking about ARBs, these are also working in the same mechanism, but instead of preventing the production, they are letting the angiotensin 2 to produce, but they are looking its effects on blood vessels. So now the effect that it narrows the blood vessels, now that effect they are blocking. So that are known as angiotensin 2 receptor blockers. So ARBs also work by relaxing the blood vessels, but instead of blocking the production of angiotensin 2, they block its effects on blood vessels. For example, it includes losartan, valsartan, and candesartan. So the as you can see here, the suffix was also similar. So these suffix are similar for the similar kind of drugs behaving, which are mechanistically similar and also coming in a similar class. So that suffix is representing that they are belonging to a same group. Okay. So I hope these two are clear to all of you. Now coming to the third one, that is calcium channel blockers. Now what do you mean by calcium channel blockers? So these medications prevent calcium from entering the heart muscle and blood vessels cells, which help relax the blood vessel and lower blood pressure. Okay. So these medication actually blocking the calcium from preventing the entrance of that calcium to heart muscle and blood vessel cells, which again relaxing the blood vessels and lowering your blood pressure. So these kind of drugs are amlodipine, diltiazem, and varam, verapamil. So this verapamil, diltiazem, and amlodipine, these are the drugs which are calcium channel blockers, and they prevent the calcium from entering the heart muscle and blood vessel so that the blood vessel remains relaxed and it lowers the blood pressure. So this is how they work as an antihypertensive. Okay. Now coming to the fourth thing, that is diuretics, that is known as also water pills. So what do you mean by diuretics? As the name suggests, these diuretics helps the body rid itself of excess water and salt, which can lower the blood volume and blood pressure. So, these water pills are uh, helping the body to get rid of the excess water and salt which is present in your body, and which can further lower the blood pressure. So, this is how they work as antihypertensive. So, for example, these kind of drugs are diazide diuretics, hydrochlorothiazide, thiazide like diuretics like chlorothalidone, indapamide, indapamide. So these things are coming into the diuretic, that is known as water pills. Again, they are working as a similar thing, that is a antihypertensive, but every antihypertensive has different mode of action. So how they are reacting, based on that they are being divided into five classes, like this ACE inhibitors, ARBs, calcium channel blockers, diuretics, and beta blockers. So now coming to the fifth one, that is beta blockers. So now what do you mean by beta blockers? So beta blockers slow down the heart rate and reduce the force of heart contraction, which again lowers the blood pressure. So it is lowering down your heart rate, and now the force of contraction, that is after taking one heartbeat, how much force your heart is pushing to contract is getting reduced, which further is lowering your blood pressure. For example, these includes atenolol, metoprolol, and bisoprolol. So these kind of drug molecules come into this category of beta blockers. Okay, so I hope these five things of how antihypertensive drugs have been divided into five groups. So you have understood how these things are. These are the five classes of antihypertensive drugs based on the action, based on the mechanism of action which are exerting by these drugs. I hope it is clear. Now coming to another three classes, that is alpha blockers. Alpha blockers relax blood. Alpha blockers relax blood vessels, making it easier for blood to flow through them. So they are also relaxing the blood vessels and making it easy for the blood to flow through the blood vessels. These include doxazosin and prazosin. Coming to the seventh one, that is centrally active antihypertensive drug. So as the name suggests, these drugs act on central nervous system to reduce sympathetic tone, which lead to decrease in blood pressure. So these are acting on central nervous system. So these are also known as centrally active antihypertensive drugs. So these includes methyl dopa and clonidine. So these two drugs are coming into this category of centrally active hypertensive drugs, which actually participate on acting central nervous system to reduce the sympathetic tone. Now, eighth one is the vasodilators. I think most of you have heard about this vasodilators. So these are the things that directly relax the smooth muscle of blood vessel, causing them to widen and lower the blood pressure. So these vasodilators uh, directly act on the muscle of blood vessel and cause them to wide, and that is how they lower the blood pressure. For example, hydralazine and minoxidil. So these two comes in the class of vasodilators. So these eight classes are there of the antihypertensive drugs. How they are divided based on the mechanism of action. So I hope it is clear to all of you how these things are. So if it is clear, then we are moving forward. So the question is, match of the following routes of administration with their preferred site. So you have to match. These are the routes of administration, and you have to match with their preferred site. So if it is subcutaneous, where is the site which is provided? Like which of the site it is preferred to go. Okay. So there is subcutaneous, intraethical, intramuscular, intravenous. So what do you think will be the right answer? You just need to match these things. Just think about it. We have already discussed these things in the past lecture. Okay, so the right answer will be um, the option number one. So in option number one, what is there? A to B. So here subcutaneous is the preferred site is surface of skin. So subcutaneous is given to your surface of skin. Intraethical, it is given to spinal cord. So this is the preferred site of the spinal cord. Intramuscular, as the name suggests, it is given to the muscle. And intravenous injections are given to veins, as the name suggests. So option number one will be the right answer. So a subcutaneous injection delivers medication into the fatty tissue layer under the skin, allowing for slow, steady absorption of medication. So subcutaneous injection is given to the fatty tissue layer which is present under your skin and which allows the steady absorption of medication. This method is favored for medication that need to be absorbed slowly into the bloodstream, like insulin, blood thinners, certain hormones. So these are preferred when you are taking the medicines like insulin, which we need to get it absorbed very slowly into the bloodstream. Okay. So if you talk about the injection sites, common injection sites includes abdomen, that is belly area. So this belly area is the common point of injection which you have taken. Like subcutaneous injections are given to this abdomen area commonly. Outer thighs, this is the outer thighs where these injections are given. Upper buttocks, these are the lower ionos, upper buttocks, where these injections are given. And the back of the upper arm. back of the upper arm. So these are the back. This is the back area where these injection could give. Okay. So these four are positions are there for the subcutaneous injections to be given. These are the preferred positions. Okay. So I hope it is clear to all of you why A is the right answer and what are the subcutaneous injection sites. So when you are talking about this intrathecal injections, it involves injecting the medication directly into the cerebrospinal fluid. So this cerebrospinal fluid, see your spinal cord, this is the brain and this is the spinal cord. So your spinal cord is actually protected by a cerebrospinal fluid, CSF. So this fluid is there which is protecting your spinal cord, right? So if you have to given this intrathecal injection, so the location of that injection into the thecal sac surrounds spinal cord. So this thing has to given into this cerebrospinal fluid. So in the fluid you have injected these kind of injection. So it is delivered medication directly into the cerebrospinal fluid surrounding the spinal cord or subarachnoid space, bypassing the blood-brain barrier for targeted drug delivery, often used for pain management, anesthesia, and certain type of chemotherapy. So these are the things for which this intrathecal injections are given. So this blood-brain barrier we have talked in the previous lecture. So what is this? It's protecting your blood stream of the brain. So we have talked about this thing in the previous lecture. So if someone wants to go through that concept, you can see that lecture video which I have uploaded on the YouTube channel. That is week 7. So intrathecal injections are injecting the medication directly into the cerebrospinal fluid surrounding the spinal cord or the space when bypassing the blood-brain barrier for targeted drug delivery. It is often used for the pain management, anesthesia, and certain type of chemotherapy. So I hope it is clear what are the subcutaneous injections, what are these intrathecal injections, and about the intramuscular and intravenous. We have already learned that it is injected in directly into the muscle, and intravenous is directly injected into the veins. So this intramuscular injections, often known as IM, is the injection of a substance into muscle. So in medicine, it is one of the several methods for parenteral administration of medication. Intramuscular injection may be preferred because muscles have larger and numerous blood vessels than subcutaneous tissue. So under your skin, there are less blood vessels which are available than your muscles, and that leads to a faster absorption than subcutaneous or intradermal injections. So medication administered via intramuscular injection is not subject to first-pass metabolism effect, which affects oral medication. So we have already talked about this first-pass metabolism. So this intramuscular injection actually bypass this first-pass metabolism, and it is very effective. It is more effective than the oral medication. It absorbs very fast than the subcutaneous or intradermal injection. So the common sites of intramolecular injections include deltoid muscle of the upper arm and gluteal muscle of the buttock. So this upper arm muscle, deltoid muscle, is the main area where you can inject this intramuscular injections. Okay. And when you are talking about this IV, that is intravenous injection, it involves directly injecting a medication or fluid into your vein and bloodstream, providing a rapid and controlled method for delivering substances into the body. So these injections are very powerful, very rapid, and it actually bypass the first pass metabolism, and the bioavailability of these kind of things are much higher than the oral medication. Okay, that is why they are very much effective. So if you have certain pain and that is intolerable, so it is not preferred to take a medicine. So doctors prescribe you IV injections rather than the oral medication if you are in immense pain, or if you uh, have some disease which is actually now is not controllable through oral medication, because it would take some time for the oral medication to get absorbed, to get to the target site and to get it acted. So in that case, what doctors do, they will provide you IV injections or intramuscular injections to get a rapid action, and you will get a rapid relief from that pain. Okay. So I hope it is clear to all of you what are these four things, that is subcutaneous, intrathecal, intramuscular, intravenous routes of administration or drug. If anyone has any doubt, please raise your hand, or you can put your message in the chat box as well. So if not, I am going to the next question. So which of the following is the correct definition of bioavailability? Bioavailability describes the proportion of the drug administered that is metabolized very quickly and thus is not available to induce a psychological effect. Bioavailability describes the ability of a administered drug metabolite to cause undesirable physiological effect. Bioavailability is used to describe the fraction of dose of drug administered that is present within the body and facilitates the desired physiological effect. Or bioavailability is the length of time an administered drug is present in the body, thus is available to cause physiological effect. So we have talked about this bioavailability many a times. So based on that, can someone tell me what will be the right answer? Just think about it. So the right answer is bioavailability is used to describe the fraction of drug administered that is present within the body and facilitate the desired physiological effect. Okay, I hope it is clear to all of you. Now, which of the following is not classed as an in vivo test? In vivo. Testing anti-cancer drugs on a tumor grown on the back of a rat. Testing analgesics by determining a guinea pig's sensitivity to pain. Testing antibacterials by measuring the growth of microorganisms on a petri dish in their presence. Testing antibacterial agents in infected rats. So, what do you, which is not classified as an in vivo test? So, you have learned about that in vivo and in vitro test, right? So, based on that, you have to answer that which of these tests is not classified as an in vivo test. So, any answers, any guesses? So, the testing antibacterials by measuring the growth of microorganism on a petri dish in their presence is not in vivo test. So, now what do you mean by in vitro, in vivo, in silico? So, first of all, we'll talk about in silico. So, it is performed in a virtual setting, a computational or virtual simulation. That is, a low cost can be performed with high human data, high transferability and presence. ethically favored. So this is the test which is performed on a computer. A virtual setup is there, virtual simulation you have to run, and then we'll get the testing result. This is known as in silico test. That is of low cost. Okay, and that you can be performed by uh, high human data. If you have human data, you can set up a virtual setting and go through a simulation, virtual simulation, and then you will get a result over it. Now coming to in vitro. Now, what do you mean by in vitro test? So in vitro is in glass. In glass meaning the study takes place in a test tube. So like what you have taken this testing antibacterial by measuring the growth of microorganism on a petri dish in their presence. So this is an in vitro test rather than an in vivo test. So in vitro test takes place in glass. That means it will take place in a test tube. That is also a low costing test, suitable for high throughout large scale testing. But when you are talking about in vivo, now in vivo is different from what in silico and in vitro is. In vivo is in life, meaning the study takes place in a living organism. So now the study is going to take place inside an organism. So it can address the complexity of organ system. It is better evaluate the safety, toxicity, and efficacy of a drug candidate in a complex model. High translatability to humans. So this is a very this can address a complexity. If you want to understand better the safety toxicity of a drug, you have to run an in vivo test. So if you see closely, testing anti-cancer drugs on a tumor grown on the back of a rat. See, you are injecting your drug into the rat. That is a living organism. A rat having the tumor grown on the back. You are testing your anti-cancer drug on it. A rat is a living organism, so that is why it is an in vivo test. So you are injecting some of your drug molecules onto the rat. When you are talking about this testing analgesics by determining a unique pig sensitivity to pig, so pig is also a living organism, right? So you are injecting your drug in a living organism, and then you are seeing the toxicity, safety, efficacy, potency of that particular drug into a living organism. Okay, then you can translate that thing into the humans. First, you will try on the animals, and then you will try over the small group of humans. Now, testing antibacterials by measuring the growth of microorganisms on a petri dish in their presence. That I have told you that it is a petri dish test. That means it is happening in a glass. That means it is a in vitro test rather than a in vivo test. And fourth one is the testing antibacterial agents in infected rats. Obviously, the rats are infected. That means it has bacteria grown. And if you're testing your antibacterial agent, if you're testing your antibacterial drug into a living organism, that is rat, then you're talking about a in vivo test. Okay, so this is the main difference between in silico, in vitro, and in vivo test. So I hope I will be able to explain these three terms nicely. So I hope it is clear to all of you. If anyone has any doubt, please stop me and please ask questions as much as possible. So is it clear? So if it is clear, then moving to the next question. Which of the following statement is true? Parallel combinatorial synthesis involves synthesis of a large number of compounds using the same reaction sequence where there is a mixture of compounds in each reaction vessel. Parallel combinatorial synthesis involves the synthesis of a large number of compounds using different reaction sequence where there is a different single compound formed in each reaction vessel. Mixed combinatorial synthesis involves the synthesis of large number of compounds using a variety of different synthetic routes to produce a mixture of compounds in each reaction vessel. And the last one is a parallel combinatorial synthesis carried out in a specified number of vessels will produce less compounds than a mixed combinatorial synthesis. So first of all, we will be talking about this combinatorial and parallel synthesis, and then you will be able to answer those questions. So now, what do you mean by a combinatorial synthesis and a parallel synthesis? So as the name suggests, combinatorial synthesis is a chemical synthesis method that can help to prepare a large number of compounds in a single process. So in single process, you are able to prepare large number of compounds. So the method is split synthesis method. The reaction mixture is performed with a mixture of compounds, many types present in the reaction vessel. So support bound compounds, these are the many types of present in the reaction vessel. And the analysis is it requires a deep convolution processor to identify an individual compound of interest. Okay. That is known as combinatorial synthesis. So it is a chemical synthesis that help to prepare large number of compound in a single process. And when you're talking about a parallel synthesis, so now what do you mean by parallel synthesis? How it is different from that combinatorial? So in parallel synthesis, it is an important technique that can be used in accelerating the discovery of new compounds and in screening for optimal process conditions. Method is one lead, one compound method, one thing at a time. Reaction mixture is performed with an individual compound. It is not performed with a mixture of compound like combinatorial synthesis. Support bound compounds are only one type of support bound compounds in the reaction vessels, whereas in combinatorial we have many types present in the reaction vessel. Analysis is requiring either a support bound or free solution. This is how you can differ the combinatorial versus parallel synthesis. So large number of similar compounds, automatic, small scale, resin lead, same reaction sequence apply to many compounds. So if you have understood now what are the parallel combinatorial synthesis and the mixed combinatorial synthesis, you can clearly answer this question. So the right answer, so first of all, parallel combinatorial synthesis involves the synthesis of large number of compounds using same reaction sequence where there is a mixture of compound in each reaction vessel. Right, right. So this is a synthesis. Parallel compound combinatorial synthesis involves the synthesis of large number of compounds using different reaction vessels. So you are using a large number of compounds with different reaction vessels, right? But no, there is the thing that you have same reaction vessel where there is a different single compound combination. No, there is no single compound which is forming in the reaction, right? So mixed combinatorial synthesis involves synthesis of a large number of compounds using a variety of different synthetic routes to produce a mixture of compound in each reaction vessel. A parallel combinatorial synthesis carried out in a specified number of vessels will produce less compound than a mixed combinatorial synthesis, right? So this is the right answer. This parallel combinatorial synthesis is carried out in a specified number of vessels and will produce less compounds than a mixed combinatorial synthesis. I hope it is clear to all of you. What is this parallel and combinatorial synthesis? So I think we should stop it for this day. We will be taking the next question in the next session. That would be good. So I hope everything which I have taught till now is clear to all of you, is clear and is evident that you have learned something from this tutorial. So the main purpose of this tutorial is you learn something new and you are able to answer those questions. The concept which you have learned here and the questions which I am asking based on the concepts only which I have taught. So I hope you people are able to understand the things and able to understand things as well as able to answer the questions which is based on the concept which we have taken. in this tutorial session, as well as in the video lectures which Professor Haripnath Chakrapani is uploaded on NPTEL platform. So please make sure that you have seen those videos, and that will be very helpful for you guys. Okay, to understand this course better, to understand the tutorial better, everything. So I'm taking those questions as well as the questions and the new concepts which is not covered there. So I'm taking some of the new concept which is uh, aligned with the medicinal chemistry course. So yes, here you will understand some different things and different concepts. So I hope I'm making myself clear over these videos. So this is the week 8 and now the 4 weeks are remaining. So 4 lectures are remaining. So I hope to see you all guys there. So we'll meet on next Saturday at the same time. So thank you so much for attending the session. And now I will be ending this session. Just take a quick look on this slide just to make sure that you are getting what is this combinatorial and parallel synthesis. And if you doesn't understand anything, please feel free to ask. Just take 2 minutes to understand this slide. Okay, if there is no doubt, then I'm just closing the session for the day. Thank you so much for joining and hope to see you again in the next session. Thank you.